Hey guys, okay, this is a little bit cold outside, so I'm wearing my jacket. Forgive the noise my jacket might be making. I'm going to make this test grid on my F1 because it's pretty fast. It's a Galvo. I also have an S1, which is a 40-watt laser. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that I have here. 40-watt laser can do a pretty decent job, but since it's very powerful and it's diode laser, even if it was a 10-watt or 5-watt, what it has a tendency is to actually bend the metal, the aluminum, because it's fairly thin and it isn't very sturdy, if you will. Because if you put a lot of heat into it, it bends pretty damn quick. But if you notice, I added the little 40 watt there, so I'll know which laser did it. But it's pretty obvious that it was a 40 watt. It actually looks pretty good. It looks actually pretty darn good. Now, I also did it with the 2-watt laser inside of the same machine. The infrared doesn't create as much heat, even though it actually does create heat. Don't let people tell you it doesn't. If you run over it several times or if you go over it slow, it will create heat. But it did a heck of a lot better job. Notice again in the corner here, I wrote down that it was actually a 2-watt laser. I just happened to do squares or slightly rectangles. But let's go with a blank card. I'm going to pop it in my F1 here, and I'm going to go onto the screen. I'm going to show you how it works. So I'm going to make a test grid. So I'm going to go over here to this little box. I'm going to click on it. I can make circles. I can make rectangles. I could actually use any kind of design I want. I can actually go over here to where it says designs, and I can pull out a design of whatever I want, a bunny, a reindeer. I mean, pretty much anything I want. I can go to where it says shapes. I can make all the designs trees, right? I can bring trees over here. I can do anything I want. But I like to keep it simple, so I'm just going to go with a square, right? Or with something like this, right? Make a little bitty square. It doesn't have to be large. You're just doing just enough to make a test on it. Let's go ahead and close this. Left click on most everything here. You're going to go with the 6th button down in XCS, which is this one here. Click on that, and it clicks Material Test Array. Click on Material Test Array. And remember, we've already told it we want it to score, so we want it to engrave. So all of these are going to be to engrave. You can change your parameters to anything you want. Right now, the maximum power is 100%, and the maximum speed is 4,000, because this is a really fast laser. Your S1 and your P2 is not going to be able to go anywhere near this speed. Minimum speed is 10, minimum power, minimum speed. This is the columns, 5 columns down, 5 columns across. But if you want to go with a large test grid, you actually change any of these numbers. Now, what you need to keep in mind is if you're going to use a powerful laser on thin material or easily combustible material, you got to remember you have to adjust these numbers. So let's give an example. We're going to do this with my diode laser inside of my F1. So we know we're using it on aluminum, and aluminum is going to bend easy. It's only 10 watt. Okay, so do we want to go with 100% power at 10% speed? We probably going to warp the card and bend it pretty darn bad. So let's raise our minimum speed. Let's raise it to 25, right? 25 might still be a little bit slow for a card with 10% power or with a 10 watt power. But the fastest speed is going to be 4,000. We're going to see what it can do. So we're going to go with minimum speed of 25 because we don't want to warp anything. Maximum power at 100%. And we're going to go with 5 and 5 rows. Nah, let's make it worth it. Let's go 10 rows. Now, when you do this, it's automatically going to distribute the power and the speed for you. It does everything automatically. You notice 25 speed at 10 power, or it's going to be 100 speed at 100 power, or 100 speed 10 power. You just measure the grid. 30 power at 92 speed, things like that. Now, what I like to do, I'm going to go ahead and click done. What I like to do is I like to tell it what laser I was using. So when you move this, you make sure you either it has a circle over everything, or it has a square over everything like that, or you group everything together. Drag a square and group everything together. Because if not, what's going to happen is you're going to pull one of these out of alignment. So I like to actually add what kind of laser I'm using. So hit T for text and drop your text down here. Don't worry about the size right now. We're going to put a 10 watt and then we're going to put F1. We're using the F1, right? Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. Or I'm going to make it much smaller. And I like to turn it a little bit so I can fit it on the card a whole lot easier. So I'm going to do something like that. So it won't be in the way. 10 watt on the F1. And that power is going to be, we'll give that about 38 power. And we'll give it a little bit of speed. Doesn't have to be super fast. It's just going to lightly engrave it. That's all we want, or lightly score it. Okay, so now I have it set up. It's going to say 10 watt for the F1. This is the engraved test on the F1. I don't need to put F1 there, but it says F1. And I'm going to go up to 4,000 speed, 10 power, and I'm going to drop it all the way down to 25 speed, 10 power. Notice this power down here, it says speed up here. Going to go ahead and frame it just to make sure that everything looks good. When you hit frame, what happens is it actually puts a little box over the card or whatever you put in there, and you adjust this to where it needs to be. So if I get this thing to highlight, okay. Not everything's grouped. You notice that part's not grouped, so let's redo this again. Drag a window over it again, and we're going to hit groups, and now everything's together. So if I hit this, everything's grouped in together. Now I'm going to make it a little bit smaller to fit the card. I don't want to burn outside of my card and then onto my jig, destroying my jig. Okay. Smaller, a little bit smaller. And it looks like it'll fit my jig. I'm going to turn up the color brightness of the laser beam, or the intensity of the laser beam. Okay. And since I want it to be wider on the card as opposed to just an actual square, I'm going to drag it wider. Drag it wider. I know I'm not showing you the card, but you'll see the results here in just a few moments. This will not take long once it gets started. And through the magic of editing, it won't take long at all. Okay, so now it's going to cover the entire card, kind of like you saw the first cards that I showed you. Okay, it's a little bit kind of widened. You can see it's kind of widened, but it'll work. The whole point is it'll work. So I'm going to hit stop. I'm going to hit process. And I'm going to start. Now remember, if you're doing this on wood, basswood or something like that, you always want to be here when it does it. You're going to find out that it's going to cut through certain parts of it. Closer down here, it's going to start cutting through here, and it's going to just slice right through it. And over here, it's going to start to engrave them, and you'll see the depth of the engravings and things like that. But again, I'm doing this on aluminum, and it might bend it, but we'll find out what's going to happen here. I'm going to go ahead and hit start. I'm going to close the door. You just heard it chirp. And I'm going to hit the button and let it get started. And we'll see what happens. All right, that was pretty darn quick. Actually, it took about a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and open the door and take a look at the card. Pop the card out, doing this with one hand. And if you notice the card, it actually put a slightly different color. It's almost kind of golden in some spot. This is what the Galvo lasers will do for it. And I did this in diode. So this is what the test grid looks like once it's put onto your card. I didn't go with too hot, and it didn't seem to warp it at all because I turned down that power, or I turned down or I turned up the speed, right? So that's pretty much how you make a test grid. It's not very hard at all.